Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me today, Chris, Fedor, cleveland.com Cavs beat reporter, right on back from the travel week from hell, and Jimmy Watkins, cleveland.com columnist. And we're here to break down all the things going on around the NBA, as there are fewer than 12 games left. And we've reached the point in the season where everything begins to tighten. One injury can shift the standings. One rule can reshape legacies. One move can define whether a team is actually a contender or just looks like one in March. And right now, all of that seems to be happening at once. The Eastern Conference is being pulled into multiple different directions. When we talk about tiers, when we talk about teams trying to set themselves up for a playoff run, and the Detroit Pistons are trying to prove they're more than a one-star team. The 65-game rule is once again testing how we define those levels of greatness as well. And of course, the Cleveland Cavaliers are sitting in the middle of it, navigating urgency, expectation, and again, a closing window, as we've discussed on this podcast at an abundance. But I want to start with the biggest news that we haven't covered yet on this podcast, which is Cade Cunningham. He was diagnosed with a collapsed lung just a week ago, and it's unsure whether or not he'll be able to return for this regular season. It's unlikely. And a collapsed lung can sideline him for the remainder of the regular season. And if that happens, it's likely that he'll fall short of that 65-game threshold for all NBA consideration. He's just 4 games shy of that right now. And also, that also implicates the playoffs, obviously, with the Detroit Pistons being the number 1 seed. Guys, what are you thinking about how serious this injury could be for the positioning of the Eastern Conference, for Cade Cunningham and his preparation for one of his few playoff experiences, and also just the Detroit Pistons and all they've worked for to get to this point in the season?
Well, first off, guys, for the standings, it hasn't done anything because Detroit just keeps winning. They play so hard. They do have a little bit of regular season depth. Dennis Jenkins has stepped up. Jalen Duren has taken his game to a different level. Tobias Harris has gotten a bigger role. So from a regular season standpoint, I do think Detroit is somewhat built to withstand this, especially given the cushion that they've already created. Boston's got to chase them down. The Knicks have to chase them down. The Cavs have to chase them down. If somebody else is going to take the number 1 seed, it not only has to be Detroit going a little bit backwards, but these other teams have to run them down and build up these winning streaks as well. So when you need both of those things to happen, I mean, the Knicks are rolling right now, and they still haven't really made up that much ground because the Pistons keep winning these games. So I said it when it happened, I sent it to the subtexters. I said, look, this is obviously a big loss for the Pistons, and there are legitimate concerns that you have about their playoff viability without Cade because of what teams are going to do to them in a playoff environment if he can't be the same version of himself, if he can't be healthy enough to play in the playoffs. But during the regular season, they're coached so well, they play so hard, they do have enough playable depth for the regular season to navigate this particular absence, and that is what has happened to this point. So from a standings perspective, it really hasn't changed anything. Boston's not put it together the way that a lot of people thought with Jason Tatum coming back. There's obviously growing pains there. There are some things that they're working through. And even though the Knicks have won 6 in a row, the Knicks are still sitting in the 3 spot. So I'd still believe that Detroit is good enough to maintain the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. And then for the Cavs, I mean, being 4th to me would remain beneficial for them. Staying in that side of the bracket would be beneficial for them. It's not like they have to manipulate the standings or they've got to, quote unquote, worry about who they're going to see in the playoffs. But you want the easiest path to the NBA Finals, especially when you're in this finals or bust type timeline. So to me, that still remains staying on the side of the Detroit bracket, despite the fact that in the regular season, more times than not, they're going to play harder than their opponent. and that's going to get them some bankable wins here down the stretch of the season. Although their schedule is brutal. There's no denying that.
It looks like it's going to work out this way anyways, with the Cavs being on the Detroit side of the bracket. And two, you'd probably prefer it regardless. But I think if for some weird reason the Cavs end up within, like we were in another situation we've had recent years where like a half a game here, a half game there on the last day of the season, the Cavs have a choice. Like this injury to me makes it so like I would actually jig up with the standings. I would mess around. I would tempt fate and the basketball gods. When there's a chance, like a legitimate chance, who knows how long this injury is going to be. I know that people have been floating around like the average length of, I think I've seen Tom Haberstroh floating around like the average length of previous lapsed lung absences. You get up to like, I think like 12, 13 games, about a month. Seems like Cade would be potentially ready like right around the start of the playoffs, but I'm of the mindset that as competent and well coached as the Pistons have looked in admittedly a handful of games against bad teams without Cade in a playoff setting with the way Charlotte's playing or the way you get Eric Spoelstra in a 7-game series. I know the Cavs absolutely torched the Heat last year, but I think there's a better Heat team than that team, and Spoelstra talent gap between those Cavs and that Heat team and this Pistons team and this Heat team is probably a little bit smaller. I'm opening up the door for chaos in my side of the playoff bracket. The other point I think we should touch here, because I know Chris has been thinking about this, is the 65-game rule comes into play here with Cade. Like Cade, who's had this legitimate MVP candidate, first team All-NBA season, now gets left off of everything completely. I mean, he gets an all-star nod, which is nice, but it's like this season never happened. And I know that seems silly to say right now because we're all living it and we've all been watching Cade, or at least you've been following box scores, and you think to yourself, what do you mean people are going to forget about it? I mean, this is the whole reason we do all these silly awards is because we're trying to keep record of something here. And this is at the end of the day how people get like compared throughout history. I wasn't old enough to see frickin' Jerry West play basketball in real time, but I can piece together how good of a career he had, both by word of mouth and by doing the research, right? It gets harder to do the research when you start messing with the awards for arbitrary reasons, especially when voters were messing with them for arbitrary reasons to begin with. Like this stuff, the 65-game rule, as well-intentioned as it was, as much as we should respect the fans and the money they pay to see their favorite players, like voters were already saying, oh, you've missed a lot of games. I'm going to at least knock you down a peg from first team to second team or second team to third team, what have you. Like that was already happening. We didn't really need this rule in the first place. And I just think we need to highlight that because it's happening again.
I agree. If you as the NBA are going to empower a certain number of voters and you're going to say, we believe in you enough to have some say in what happens in the history of the game, MVP, Sixth Man of the Year, Most Improved, All NBA, All Defense, Defensive Player of the Year, all these different awards that are meaningful in the history of the game and meaningful to players and coaches and all those things. If you are going to do your due diligence and try to find the best possible voters, then allow them to use their brains. Allow them to say, hey, if Joel Embiid is only going to play like 30 games out of 82, then we're not going to vote for him. We're not going to give him these distinguished honors. And you've identified 100-something voters, and you're saying that we think you're smart enough to have a vote. We think you're good enough at your job to have a vote. So let them prove that or disprove that. To me, the 65-game rule is absolute lunacy. Because as you said, Jimmy, you're talking about telling the story of the 25-26 season now. And you may not have Cade. You may not have Ant. You may not have Shea. Who knows? He might miss games down this stretch. I don't know. He's right up against that borderline. Jokic, right up against it. Wemby, right up against it. You've already said that Victor Wembanyama last year was not the best, most impactful defensive player in the NBA. You've already taken one from him. All I'm saying is these guys, even if they play 60 games, even if they play 55 games, they shouldn't just be lost. They shouldn't just be forgotten. They shouldn't just be taken out of contention. I think voters are smart enough to understand that even if it's 60 games or 62, the impact that that guy had in those 62 games, that was deserving enough for him to be Defensive Player of the Year. That was deserving enough for him to be All NBA, or that was deserving enough for him to be top 3 in MVP voting. And I just think you take away and you water down what these awards are supposed to be, what they're supposed to signify, and what they're supposed to mean over the course of history. I mean, if you think about the only guys right now that have played 65 games, the ones that are currently eligible, and the ones that you're missing out on potentially in first team All NBA, MVP, not what they're going to get to, because we can assume that some of them are going to get to 65. But if we're just talking about who has hit that threshold right now, and you're putting together an MVP list, or you're putting together first team All NBA, second team All NBA, you're not talking about the best players in the game. You're not talking about the guys that have been the best throughout the course of the season. You're talking about a watered down list that you just have to compile because you came up with this arbitrary number of 65, which is completely ridiculous. And you're missing the point of what All NBA, MVP, Defensive Player, all of these awards, you're missing the point of what they should signify when you're eliminating such a big pool that is warranted to be in that conversation.
So let's go through the list of players really quickly through NBA Awards eligibility tracker on the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm going to give you a name and I'm going to give you the amount of games that they can miss before being ineligible for NBA awards, whether that's All NBA, All Defensive Team, MVP, you name it. Nikola Jokic, he can miss one more game. Devin Booker, he can miss one more game. Evan Mobley, he can miss 2 more games. Kawhi Leonard, he can miss 2 more games. Victor Wembanyama, he can miss 3 more games. Luka Doncic, he can miss 5 more games. Cooper Flagg, he can miss 5 more games. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, 5. Anthony Edwards, 5. Tyrese Maxey, 9. Cade Cunningham, 10. And guys, every team in the NBA has played at least 70 games already, meaning that there are 12 games left. And when it comes to Cade Cunningham in specific, historically, the recovery timelines for this kind of injury suggest a window of about 3 to 4 weeks. CJ McCollum missed 12 games in 2023. CJ McCollum also missed 18 games in 6 weeks in 2021 due to the same collapsed lung injury. Terrence Jones in 2015 missed 6 games, 2 weeks. Gerald Wallace in 2009 missed 7 games, 3 weeks. These are significant injuries, and JB Bickerstaff has talked about it. Coaches around the league have talked about the 65-game rule. When it's a significant injury like this, when it's a significant injury that anybody has been dealing with, no player in the NBA should have to feel like they have to play through injury to be able to be in a category that they've already proven worthy of. So I definitely think it's going to be interesting with Cade Cunningham, and I want to get into this conversation about that team, the Detroit Pistons versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. We've already talked about how they match up, potentially already being a stylistically very interesting matchup. Obviously, Jay Bickerstaff being on the other side of this conversation. But Chris, you mentioned it. Jalen Duren has taken his game to another level. They were able to beat the Los Angeles Lakers tonight, who were on a 9-game winning streak. And yet, if the Detroit Pistons do not have Cade Cunningham, they're more than likely going to be a first-round exit. Is that where we're looking? Because I think this team has done so much to prove that they can win in tough games. But the difficulty level, the intensity level, the physicality level, the mental wear level increased substantially, especially in the playoffs. So I'm curious, with just a few games left in the regular season for all these teams, how important is it for the Detroit Pistons to get Cade Cunningham back? And is it worth pushing him to return for the playoffs when he's not at 100% so that they can continue to get where they believe that they can be?
Look, I said this the other day on a podcast. Injuries are like snowflakes. They're not the same. They last a certain amount of time. They look different. Some are more significant. Some aren't. Some you can play through. Some you can't. So I think we have to start there. There are certain injuries that players feel like they can play through, or teams feel like they can play through. And the question is, Is this the kind of injury that the Pistons and Cade believe that even if he's less than 100%, he can play through well enough and he can be effective enough? I don't know the answer to that, but that's what they're going to have to decide. A couple of years ago, Jared Allen literally could not lift his arms above his head. So the things that he was required to do on a basketball floor, he could physically not do those things. And that would have hampered his ability to be any kind of effective, going for rebounds, trying to contest shots, setting screens, all that kind of stuff. So is this the kind of injury that Cade can play through? I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's one that you can play through. It's a collapsed lung. The only reason that I know of it is because of my watching of Chicago PD, Chicago Med, and Chicago Fire, and they do all these pneumothorax things when all these paramedics are trying to get these people to breathe again. So it seems like it's a pretty significant thing, especially if you're talking about one of the things that the Pistons were going to do going into the playoffs was probably play Cade like 40 minutes, 42 minutes, 44 minutes, something along those lines. I don't know. It's going to be really, really difficult from my perspective. It's going to be really difficult for him to play through this and be effective and be the kind of player that Detroit needs him to be for them to be as competitive as they thought they could be in the playoffs. You're talking about a 7-game series against good teams, deep teams, talented teams, well-coached teams. If you get to the playoffs, if you become one of the top 8 seeds in the Eastern Conference, you probably qualify to some degree with those things. So now you're talking about what is the team going to do game plan wise? They're going to try and, well, they were with Cade there. They were going to try and make things as difficult as possible on Cade, get the ball out of his hands, and force everybody else to make shots, to make plays. They don't have a consistent, reliable secondary creator. They don't have a lot of shooting. They're not a good half-court offense. They're built on defense. They're built on toughness. They're built on physicality. They're built on bothering you and making you uncomfortable and all those kinds of things. But they were going to have flaws to begin with in a 7-game series. Now you talk about potentially taking away the best initiator that they have, the best scorer that they have, the guy who the ball is in the hands of in late game pressure-packed situations, the guy who is in the running for clutch player of the year because of the way that he has played in those kinds of moments and the way the Pistons have performed in those kinds of moments. So you don't want to just completely dismiss them because there are elements to them that make them difficult to deal with in a playoff environment. But Charlotte in a 7-game series would probably push them. Orlando in a 7-game series would probably make them pretty uncomfortable. Miami in a 7-game series maybe possibly pushes them. So you don't want to completely dismiss them, but you have to be honest about when you're talking about that team and what Cade is responsible for and the success that he has created for them in a bunch of different areas. You take that out of the mix or you limit that guy's effectiveness and you say, okay, do you have enough? Once you get into the playoffs and everything changes and it's completely different than the regular season, do you have enough with that guy not available or limited? And I would have my doubts if I was the Pistons.
So why did the Pistons trade Jaden Ivey again?
Because he's not good at basketball.
Well, we know that. We know that Jaden Ivey's not good at basketball. Again, you have to be admitting by trading him for Kevin Huerter and a protected first-round pick, that's as good as you're going to do. But he's just like, he's a guy who could be a secondary creator who was, had some injuries coming into this year and faded away from what his potential role could have been had he stayed healthy. I bring that up just to say, if the Pistons don't have Cade, they're drawing dead against any real playoff defense. And frankly, even a few semi-real playoff defenses. They just become so much easier to guard because Cade does everything for them. He makes all the plays. He creates all the shots for everybody else. It's a very heliocentric offense. Credit to them for getting a nice win against the Lakers. And I think the other two teams they've beaten recently were the Warriors and the Wizards. the Stephless Warriors and the Wizards, but it's like it's that time of year in March. You don't know what you're getting from these teams night to night. The Pistons having a good record so far without Cade is to me more about their competitive stamina than it is really about anything else. I don't think it's predictive of anything that would happen in the playoffs. I think they would have a lot of trouble scoring. And for the Cavs, you get an opportunity to match up with that team or even like a diminished version of Cade coming back from this injury. Like it's lining up really nice. The Cavs end up staying in this side of the bracket.
I think it's super interesting because we've talked about the parallels of the Cavs versus the Detroit Pistons, right? And obviously, the Cavs question all season is, can you defend in a 7-game series? Can you match up with the physicality? Can you close defensive possessions by getting on the glass and getting a rebound and getting out in transition and doing what you do offensively? We have not had questions about the Cavs offense. We haven't had questions about how their offense is going to translate into the playoffs, but we've had questions about the defense. The Detroit Pistons are the exact opposite. The Pistons know that their defense is going to translate. They know that their physicality is going to be able to match up with almost any other team. Orlando is probably the most difficult matchup for them when it comes to matching up with physicality and how they're able to keep on the same playing field, right? But the question for Detroit, especially if they don't have Cade Cunningham, is, do you have an offense? Are you able to facilitate? Are you able to handle the basketball when another team is ramping up their defense? And I think it's going to be interesting. I think the answer for all of these questions comes from that determining factor, whether it's just a good story for the Cavs or for the Pistons or an actual problem, whether or not they can, on either end of the floor, the Cavs defensively hold up for a 7-game series, or the Pistons potentially without Cade Cunningham, or even with Cade Cunningham and the little of playoff experience that all of those players have, how do they translate that to the offensive end and create success in that kind of manner? But I think it'll be an interesting topic, and it'll be something to keep an eye on. Obviously, as the Pistons just have 10 more games left in the season, the Cavs have 11. We're going to get to see them match up with the Orlando Magic on Tuesday at Rocket Arena. I think this is going to be a great understanding for the Cavs against a good defense, but also an offense that is growing and learning itself and all these other things. What do you guys think is most important for the Cavs to refine when it comes to their game over the last 11 games of the season, especially when we talk about how it's going to translate to the playoffs?
I think this is a difficult question because I don't know what version of the Cavs they're going to have in the playoffs. Jared Allen has missed a bunch of time now with severe knee tendonitis. And if you remember, tendonitis in the knee was something that hampered Donovan Mitchell a couple of years ago toward the end of the season, and it carried over into the playoffs. So if you can tell me that Jared Allen is going to be healthy and right enough, I would say figuring out the whole Evan Mobley, Jared Allen thing. Because I just don't think it's a coincidence that Evan Mobley, yes, part of it is James Harden. Yes, part of it is the film breakdowns that Evan and James are having before games so that Evan has a better understanding of what James wants in the pick and roll. Evan's profile in terms of popping versus rolling is different. How the Cavs are using Evan within the offense, that's all different too. But they're able to use him a certain kind of way because Jarrett Allen is not there. And the person that is playing next to Evan Mobley is a stretchy big man, or sometimes it's a guard masquerading as a 4. So there's more space for him. There's more room for him. There's more comfort of him being around the rim, in the paint, rolling to the basket, and not having that other defender that's kind of in the general vicinity. That other defender is closer to the 3-point line guarding Dean Wade, or guarding Jalen Tyson, or guarding Max Strus, or whatever the case may be. So I don't think you can just completely dismiss the absence of Jared Allen and what that has meant for Evan Mobley. Just like we couldn't completely dismiss the absence of Evan Mobley at the time that Jared Allen was Black History Month Jared Allen looking like the player of the month in February. Right? These things are correlated. And it doesn't mean that Jarrett and Evan can't be successful together. And it doesn't mean that the Cavs can't be successful with both of those guys on the floor. It just means there are more questions. There are more questions about them individually, and there are more questions about the team dynamic when they're all full strength. Where's Evan going to fit within the offense? Where's Jared Allen going to fit within the offense? How much room is there going to be for Evan Mobley around the paint, in the restricted area, near the rim? How much room is there going to be for Jared Allen in the same general areas? Because they want to live in the same areas, because they have success in the same areas. So that would be, to me, something that the Cavs need to work through. I mean, James Harden, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen have played less than 60 minutes together as a foursome. They got to figure that out, because that's what they want to go to in these playoff environments. You would think your four most important players playing big minutes. And then they've got to figure out, okay, who's the fifth guy with them? So I do think there are some stylistic things that they have to work through if they're at full strength, and if Jared's knee continues to respond to the rest, to the treatment, and he gets an actual opportunity to play alongside Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell and James Harden, and whatever we're calling this new four, they have an idea of who they can be together. So that would be one thing. And the other thing, and it goes without saying, is they just have to be more consistently habitual on the defensive end of the floor. The communication has to be a habit thing. The closeouts have to be a habit thing. Getting back in transition and matching up in transition, it's got to be a habit thing. Are you switching? Are you in zone? Are you in regular coverage? That all has to be a habit thing. And I just don't think, actually, I think we have enough evidence to say that they're not a great defensive team. I think we have enough evidence to say that they haven't built great defensive habits. And I don't know that there's enough time to do it for the remainder of this regular season. But they have to try to become something more than what they've been defensively, which is essentially middle of the pack. Before Harden, after Harden, before the trades for the other guys, after the trades for the other guys, with Darius, without Darius, with DeAndre Hunter, without DeAndre Hunter, everything points to them just being middle of the pack defensively. And for this team, given a lot of the personnel that they have, including the reigning defensive player of the year, that's just not good enough. So they've got to figure out who they want to be, who they're going to be on the defensive end of the floor. And yes, obviously part of that has to do with, are we going to have the two bigs? Are we not going to have the two bigs? Is Jared Allen going to be 100%? Or do we get an 80% Jared Allen or a 75% Jared Allen or whatever version of Jared Allen? So there's certainly circumstances attached to this, but to me, those are key areas for them.
Yeah, when you're at a disadvantage on defense, and when the Cavs on the perimeter, in most spots, they're at a disadvantage on defense right now, whether it's size or quickness. There's a lot of guys that good at something on defense, but they're not good at everything. I think of Cavs defense as think of peak Steph Curry on those Warriors. The Cavs as an entity were peak Steph Curry. Obviously, he's generational on the other end, but could you be in the right spots? Could you communicate? Could you just cross the T's and dot the I's on defense? If you do those things, then great teammates that he had around him. This is an extreme example because Draymond Green's the best defensive player of his generation, and Andre Iguodala is a great perimeter defender. Klay Thompson was all defense at the time. The list goes on. When they had Kevin Durant, he was an incredible defensive player as well. But the Cavs have Evan Mobley. He is the defensive player of the year, and we talked about Evan Mobley can do more to add to this equation as well. But if you do most of the stuff right, if you're in most of the right places and you talk, you should be able to put up enough of a fight to where Evan Mobley, the ultimate eraser, can erase what's left over, right? Or Jared Allen, when he gets back, he can at least get there, make it tough at the rim. And to that point, we were talking about, when Chris was talking about the two bigs, I think there's one question left about the Evan Mobley, Jared Allen pairing. I think it's mostly we're asking ourselves the same question repackaged. It's when they're both out there, the defense is better. When only one is out there, the offense is better, and they're each better individually on offense. Interesting. That's just how it works, man. One big lineups tend to be better. End of story. Two big lineups tend to be better on defense. How it goes. That's been the balance the entire time. Now, because the Cavs lack a little bit more size and or talent on the defensive end on the perimeter side, I think it could make that question even more important because you're going to need all the rim protection you can get. But the last question that's left here is, can James Harden make this work? And that's a tough question to answer when James Harden's not getting a ton of reps with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley at the same time. That would be a lineup combination that I would be very interested in seeing before and during the playoffs. Is James Harden playing with both the bigs? How good can our offense be when that is the case? Honestly, fill in whoever. If you have Donovan and James out there, I'd like to see what that looks like too. But James plus shooters plus two bigs. Can you make that work? There's potential for that to be a pretty dynamic two-way lineup because if you have the two elite defensive rim protectors out there, that's going to help you with a lot of the shortcomings you have in your other areas. And if James can't make this work, I think you might need to come to the conclusion that nobody can make it work. Because like I said, we're asking ourselves a lot of the same questions over and over and over again with this pairing. And at a certain point, I would think you'd have your answer. But I'm willing to keep an open mind with James Harden. I'm just not sure how long of a runway you're going to get to see it.
All right, guys, with the Orlando game in mind, I want to just go through the injury report really quickly. Obviously, Jared Allen, right knee tendonitis. He has missed 8 games, guys. As we knew going into the road trip, he was going to finish that missing 8 games. He's now going to miss his 9th straight game on Tuesday. Chris, you already went into detail the other day. It's a day-to-day thing, and whether or not Jared Allen is able to come back during the regular season is entirely up to how his knee responds to the workouts, the training, the rehab that he's doing behind the scenes, and how it responds to all of those things. The next biggest one on here that I'm curious to get your thoughts on, Chris, Jalen Tyson, left great toe, has been upgraded from a sprain to a bone bruise. He is now out against the Orlando Magic. We've seen this story before. We've seen the left great toe injuries before. And no, it has not been classified as turf toe at this point. But Chris, being on the road the last couple of days, what were you hearing from Jalen Tyson himself, from people around the organization about Jalen Tyson, the severity of this injury, and what it could mean for his playoff hopes, as we've talked on this podcast at length about him trying to fight his way back onto the court for longer stretches of minutes?
Timing's not good for somebody like Jalen Tyson. He is somebody who has to, quote unquote, reprove himself because it is a crowded area that he's fighting for minutes. Max Strus, Sam Merrill, Keon Ellis, maybe Dennis Schroeder, depending on how you reconfigure the other pieces of that particular lineup. Dean Wade, same thing. So he is caught in a bit of a numbers game. And if Kenny's going to play 8 or 9 instead of 10, you have to ask yourself how much of a workload is going to be there for Jalen. So he was trying to take the final stretch of this regular season and improve his defense, improve his mental mistakes, show that he could be consistent and reliable in the areas where the Cavs need him to be consistent and reliable. James Harden talked about it. Donovan Mitchell talked about it. Kenny Atkinson talked about it. Not about scoring, not about rebounding. Can you do the little things? Are you in the right places defensively? Are you making mental mistakes? Are you following the game plan? Are you in tune with the scouting report? All of those little things. The Cavs are telling you the things that have been problematic when it comes to Jalen Tyson, and they're young player mistakes. But they're still mistakes that he has to learn from and he has to get better from. Max Strus doesn't make those kinds of things. For all of his weaknesses and all of the things that probably make the fan base a little bit annoyed and frustrated with Max, he's just more reliable. He's more trustworthy. The same thing when it comes to Sam Merrill, Dean Wade. They might not have the same offensive ceiling. They might not be able to double-double. No offense to Sam, who got his first career one during this road trip. It's a little bit different, but the things that the Cavs need from Jalen Tyson or the person that's filling that role, they don't feel like he's giving consistently enough. So it was an opportunity down the stretch of the season to be like, no, you can count on me. I can learn from these things. I can get better from these things. I hear everything that you guys are saying. Now I'm going to go out on the court and I'm going to make sure that that translates. So for him to not get the opportunity to do that, he does in some ways kind of get lost in the shuffle. In saying that, I did talk to him in New Orleans. I talked to a lot of people around the team. Kenny Atkinson wanted to make it very clear when I said, "Oh boy, here we go, another toe injury, another great toe injury," and he was like, "No, no, no, Chris, no, 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 this is not the same severity as Darius's. This is not the same. The nature of this injury is just different." And I think that's part of the reason why they reclassified it actually to a bone bruise, because I think they had a better understanding of what the injury was when the swelling went down, when the pain started to subside and stuff like that. The treatment that he's undergoing is electric stim and ice and stuff like that. The first day that it happened, um, Jalen said he was in significant discomfort, to the point where any kind of movement and putting any kind of weight on that toe was incredibly painful. And you could tell that when he was walking around the locker room, he was moving slower. There was a little bit of a limp there leaving Chicago. And it just, the tone that he was speaking with, part of it was the situation that has transpired recently with him in the lineup, out of the lineup, in the fourth quarter closing lineup, not in the fourth quarter closing lineup. But the other was like, oh man, I finally got this opportunity here tonight against the Bulls because of some of the circumstances in my favor, and I couldn't finish the game, and now there's some uncertainty about when am I going to get back on the floor because my toe is throbbing. Because every movement that I'm making right now with my toe is pretty painful. So I think that was felt from him. And the first day, like I said, he was getting around the clock treatment. He was in a lot of pain. He said his toe continued to throb. But as the trip got longer and as more time was available to him to recover, get more treatment, all that kind of stuff, he said he was starting to feel a little bit better. But he also made mention that he now understands why Darius Garland was so limited. Because every movement, every sharp cut, every time his toe banged against the front of his shoe, it was a painful thing. And so I think part of this is a pain tolerance thing. I think the other part of this is they need some of this bruising, some of this swelling to go down. I think part of this is it is a stretch of this regular season. Like, yes, these games are important. Yes, Jalen Tyson probably needs these kinds of games down the stretch. But if you get this toe to recover properly, if you limit the amount of pain that he feels playing through it, if you don't allow this to linger, then the version of Jalen that you maybe get for the playoffs is a little bit different. So I do think that the Cavs are still thinking like that. I do think that the Cavs still have him in their plans. Maybe not as big of an opportunity, maybe not as big of a workload, but I do think the Cavs have him in their plans when it comes to playoff rotation or potential playoff rotation. So getting this to calm down, getting this to heal properly, getting this to a point where it's not throbbing and it's not painful to move around is pretty important for the big picture. And they've taken a big picture approach to specific injuries, and I think they'll continue to do that, especially with this one. But I do think it's notable also that they changed it from a great toe sprain to a great toe bone bruise, because that's more of how it was described to me. And that's why I think they were saying the nature of the injury, the severity of the injury was, and where the injury was on the toe was different than the Darius one.
I'm glad we tried to end that injury update on something of a positive note, because boy, for a second there, the longer Chris talked, the less confidence I had that we were ever going to see Jalen Tyson again. Like, this might be a different thing, but this idea that the Cavs can just up and change an injury designation as often as they do kind of boggles the mind. And we're saying it's not the Darius Garland toe injury, but for Jalen to then say, boy, I know what Darius Garland was going through. or I better appreciate what Darius Garland was going through earlier this season, that certainly wouldn't inspire confidence for me if I was looking forward to seeing Jalen Tyson playing in the playoffs. And we've already had the conversation about Jalen Tyson sort of rediscovering his role within a new role as the Cavs gotten more healthy, particularly around his position. And what's that done to his confidence? Looks like he's kind of playing with an internal dialogue going out there, and you kind of want him to be playing free. I think you just multiply that twofold when you add in the fact that he's trying to come back from an injury, a tricky injury, like someone steps on your toe and that could set you back a little bit. You're trusting your body, then you're kind of rediscovering the confidence you had. What happens to the jump shot that was so reliable for the 60 games of this season when you're coming back after a long layoff and you miss a couple to start? Basketball's weird like that. Confidence can wane like that. So that gives me concern. That Jalen Tyson update gives me concern about the wing rotation. And the Jared Allen knee tendonitis kind of makes me feel the same way. This is a real ominous last 3 weeks of the season we're going through with these injuries updates.
Yeah, and I think it's not just the Cavs, but also just teams around the league. As we discussed early on the podcast, Detroit's going through it. Milwaukee's going through it with Giannis trying to decide whether or not to let him play for the remainder of the season. All of these things. But when it pertains to the Cleveland Cavaliers, I think it's important that they maintain the same standard of getting these guys back healthy. And as we've talked about on this podcast, health is one of the most important factors to a lengthy playoff run. And especially with a team that, again, has still yet to get past the Eastern Conference semifinals, they don't know what it's like to play more than 2 series in a postseason and how that wears on the body, how that impacts the mental side of things, and how you have to continue to play to a certain standard, not only for 48 minutes, but for 7 games throughout a series that you haven't even gotten to yet. And I would not be surprised if we don't see Jared Allen for a little bit while longer, even though Kenny Atkinson, if somebody asks him tomorrow ahead of the Orlando Magic game how much longer Jared Allen's going to be out, he'll likely still say day-to-day, but who knows? And Jalen Tyson, I can predict that they would be extremely cautious with that, especially with the experience that they've had. And also, this is a conversation for another day, but how much rest has impacted or helped Darius Garland get back into the flow of the offense that he had when he is now with the Los Angeles Clippers and the success that they're having on the West Coast. But as I mentioned, that's another conversation for another day. So, with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who signed up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.